The Book of Numbers gets overlooked, partly because it has a really boring name.
Which is a shame. In the Hebrew tradition, the book's name is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And it's an epic travelogue about Israel's journey through the desert on their way to the land promised to Abraham.
Now, this pilgrimage should only take about 2 weeks on foot.
But instead, it takes them about 40 years.
That's crazy. It's practically half of someone's lifetime.
Yeah, it's a very long camping trip with lots of interesting stories, but let's remember, it's most helpful to back up and start with how this book is designed.
Right.
So the book is broken up into 5 sections. There are 3 wilderness locations, broken up by 2 road trips that link all the pieces together.
The first wilderness section is Mount Sinai, right here on the map.
And then in the second section, they travel to a region called Paran.
A whole bunch of things happen here in the wilderness of Paran.
And then in this 4th section is Israel's road trip to Moab.
The book ends with a large section in the wilderness of Moab, right across the Jordan River from the Promised Land.
Now, through all of these sections, the storyline just flows like a gripping dramatic movie. Everything starts great, but then the trip goes horribly wrong, and it all ends with the final redemptive moment, the surprising act of God's grace.
So let's jump into this story. It all begins at the wilderness at Mount Sinai, and we've become really familiar with this mountain.
Yeah, if you remember, Israel came here after Egypt, and they formed a covenant with God here, got the 10 Commandments here, built the tabernacle here, and they've been at this mountain for 1 full year.
And now they take a census to number the people as they prepare to leave.
Right, and they're given these instructions for how to organize all those people in the camp. God's presence in the tabernacle, and then the tribe of Levi and the priests around it, and then the rest of the tribes around them. And this pattern, it's this visual symbol for how God's holiness is at the center of their existence as a people.
And they're told that when the cloud of God's presence moves, they're to pack up and travel with it.
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant is carried by the Levites out in front, and then the tribe of Judah, and on and on. And this order is also a symbol for how God's holy presence is their leader and guide through the wilderness.
We begin the second section of the book with enthusiasm as they leave Mount Sinai and travel up to Paran. God's with them, everything's organized. This is going to be great.
But it's not great. After just 3 days on the road, the people are complaining about their hunger and thirst, and then even Moses' brother and sister start bad-mouthing him in front of all the people.
Not a great start. But now we're into the third section, the wilderness of Paran. This is where they send the 12 spies to scout out the Promised Land. 2 of those spies come back, and they're really optimistic.
But the other 10 are freaked out, and they don't trust God, and they go around saying, we're going to get annihilated in there. And so they start a mutiny, and they try to appoint a new leader who's going to take all the people back to Egypt. And so basically, they are refusing to go into the Promised Land, and God honors their choice. He says that this generation is going to wander for 40 years and die in the wilderness, and only their kids will get to enter the Promised Land.
You know, this story here gets brought up many times in the Bible by different authors.
Yeah, and it always serves as a reminder that while God remains faithful to his people and his promises, he will honor their choices. He'll let them waste their whole lives if they choose to live in rebellion.
Okay, so the trip's been a disaster so far.
And it gets worse here in this 4th section as they're traveling to Moab. Even Moses has a moment of rebellion and is disqualified from entering the Promised Land. Then there's another rebellion among the people. It results in this snake attack. And what makes all these rebellions even worse is that every step of the way, God has been providing. He's been offering forgiveness. He's been giving them food and water and this crazy stuff called manna.
Yeah, what is that stuff?
Yeah, no idea. But in spite of all this, they keep complaining, and they say that they wish they had died in slavery in Egypt.
If I was God, I would just give up on these guys.
You would think. But that's what makes this story in the final section so surprising. Israel has just arrived in Moab, and the king of Moab, he's freaked out that this huge group of people is traveling through his land. So he hires this pagan sorcerer named Balaam to pronounce curses on them.
This guy means business.
Yeah, and so Balaam, he says, okay, I'm going to pray to the Hebrew God, and let's see what happens. And 3 different times he attempts to curse them, but each time he finds that he can utter only blessing. Most surprising is the last blessing, where he prophesies that out of Israel will rise a victorious king. And this king is somehow going to be connected to God's promise to Abraham to bless all nations through this family. So here's Israel rebelling down in the camp, totally unaware that up in the hills, God is protecting and even blessing them.
The book ends here in Moab. Israel's getting ready to go into the Promised Land, They count up everyone again, just like at the beginning. They're leaving the old generation behind, including Moses.
But before they leave Moses, he gives them his last words of warning and wisdom. And that speech is what the next book, Deuteronomy, is all about.
All right, so we get a good overview of how the book is laid out there. Excuse me, boy, swallowed a fly. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't really swallow a fly. But we started, if you've been here for some time, probably about 3.5 years ago, we started in the book of Genesis. We've now been through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and we are now getting into Numbers. And it's the same story all throughout. It's God's story of redemption. Excuse me. It is God's story of redemption. Everything is pointing toward Jesus. We will see that even today. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because we don't need a big introduction here. We got an overview of how the book is laid out. But it's still the same story from Leviticus. The children of Israel, he did mention this in the video. It is believed that they were at Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai, for about a year. The book of Numbers covers about 40 years, 39 years, almost 40 years of their life. And so we obviously are not going to get all 40 years, every single detail. We are going to get sections and snapshots of the travel from Egypt to the land of Canaan. Now, in case you're wondering, what in the world, maybe you're just coming in thinking, why in the world are they going from Egypt to Canaan? What is that all about? Well, they were slaves in Egypt. And God rescued them using Moses. He's now getting them, he's leading them to the promised land, to Canaan. But in the process, he's training these people like little kids being trained. He's teaching them. You think about a dad, a parent, would teach their kid how to walk, how to talk, how to feed themselves, how to go to the bathroom on their own, how to tie their shoe, how to cross the street, how to pick up after themselves, all those things. That's what God is doing for his children, the children of Israel here. He's teaching them how to live because they've come out of slavery and they do not know how to be God's children. They do not know how to be God's people. And so he's teaching them along the way. So this continues the story, and we'll pick it up in Numbers chapter 1. There are two main divisions. Numbers chapter 1, there's three main divisions. The first is a command. We'll see that there's a command given by God. The command is to count, and that's our second main division. The actual counting of the people will blow your mind if you're not familiar with the numbers, the numbers of people out there in the wilderness. And then we'll have this last section called the caretakers. We will spend most of our time in the command and caretakers section, the count section. We will move very quickly through. And chapter 2, we will move even quicker through, but we will cover both chapters. So let's get to the command section, which is verses 1 through 16, though we will not read all of those verses. Verse 1 says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of meeting." Important that you understand that from the get-go. We are going to hear a lot this morning. In fact, the buzzword for today is order. There's order in everything that God does. He doesn't do anything randomly or willy-nilly or half-baked or just throw things out there. Everything is with a purpose. Now remember, he made the tabernacle of meeting to meet his people in. Notice what he does in verse 1. "Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting." He designed it for that, so that's what he's using it for. "On the first day of the second month in the second year." So notice they've been out of Egypt for a little while. They haven't been out of Egypt for just a month. Okay? They've been in Sinai for a year, so here we go into the second year. And it says in verse 1, "After they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying," verse 2, "Take a census." Anybody know what a census is? What is it? Sir?
Kind of how many people there are?
Okay, counting how many people there are. Thank you very much. Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually. So God here is giving a command in verse 2 to count only the males. Why is that? Guys, just the guys. Is that because God likes guys better than he does girls? Is that why? No? First service thought that was true. The guys were like, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Fist bumps, the whole thing. Yeah, I think God likes guys better. It's pretty much why he did that. Let's find out why he did that. Verse 3, from 20 years old and above. So only the strong, good-looking guys. Okay? So it was just the guys, and only those guys that were 20 years old and above, because anybody younger than 20, psst, right? 20 years old and above. Here it is. Who are able to go to war in Israel. So the command was to count the males who were able to be part of the military. Now all of a sudden the girls are like, you know what, it's okay if you just count the guys. I don't want to go to the military, okay? Because those outfits don't look good on me. But he counts just the males who are available for the military. That's what it is. Those who were able to go to war. He says, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies. So real quickly, before we move on, help me out here. The command goes out to count who? Who's the census supposed to involve? The command to count involves, in verse 2, the males. Then in verse 3, the military, those guys who were able to join the military. So the command to count involves who? Man, excellent. See? Pay attention. And the males who were available for what? There it is. Melissa's got it. See what happens when you pay attention? Okay? The command was to count the males who could be part of the military. 20 years old and older. 20 years old and older. So verse 4 says, and with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. These are the names of the men who shall stand with you. In other words, these guys, Moses and Aaron, these guys are going to assist you. Okay? These are leaders from each tribe. Now, in verse 5, it mentions from Reuben. Verse 6 mentions from Simeon. Verse 7, from Judah, from Issachar. We get from. You need to understand that the names that we're looking at, from Reuben, from Simeon, from Judah, from Issachar, from Zebulun, these are the 12 sons of Jacob, if you remember way back in the book of Genesis. These guys from Reuben and Simeon and Judah and Issachar, those guys are no longer alive. They've been dead for a long, long time. But what has happened is that God has, each of these guys, Reuben and Simeon and Judah, all those guys, they each had a family who had more and more family members. In other words, their families grew and grew and grew. That's what happens. Two people get together, they have kids, their kids have kids, those kids have kids. You know, it continues to multiply. So God is considering each of these people, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, who have already passed, but he's considering their families one tribe. There's a tribe from Reuben, there's a tribe from Simeon, there's a tribe from Judah, there's a tribe from Issachar. If you were to go back, you'd find out that these are all the 12 sons of Jacob. Okay? So from the tribe of Reuben, verse 5, this guy named Eliezer, the son of Shadur. From the tribe of Simeon, verse 6, Shelumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. He goes on to say from Judah in verse 7 and names Nahshon. Verse 8, from Issachar, Nathaniel. From Zebulun, Eliab is going to join them. Verse 10, he does something different. Joseph, who was one of his sons, had two sons. One was named Ephraim and the other Manasseh. Well, what God does is he doesn't pick just one of those from, or he doesn't just pick the tribe of Joseph, but he actually splits them up into two. One is the tribe of Ephraim, one is the tribe of Manasseh, and he picks individuals from those families also. So Joseph got a double portion, man. Double portion. Verse 11, Benjamin. And then 12, one of my all-time favorites, Dan. I always thought that that was so funny. It's like the tribe of Reuben, and the tribe of Simeon and Judah. And then you hear Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Dan. Sounds so funny. You got just this normal name, just like, just the tribe of Dan. But from Dan, there was an individual chosen. Verse 13, from Asher, because of where he grew up, there was a shortage of lotion. Verse 14, from Gad, this Eliasaph was chosen. And in verse 15, the man with the girl's name, Naphtali. Doesn't that sound like a girl's name? Would you want to be named Naphtali? Me neither. From Naphtali, this individual is chosen Ahira. And then he says in verse 16, these were chosen from the congregation, leaders of the fathers' tribes, heads of the divisions in Israel. Okay? So we understand the command is for the males, count the males, and the military. Now, we'll see some big numbers here in just a moment in this count. You are not going to see any subpoints in this section if you're taking notes, because we're going to move through quickly, and there's not much to take notes on. There's just a lot of interesting information. But in verse 17 it says, then Moses and Aaron took these men that were just named, that have been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they recited their ancestry by family, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, each one individually. So each of these individuals knew their ancestry. They knew where they came from, which is really, really interesting. Ancestry right now is kind of a big thing, maybe not so much with you. A few years back, my family got me one of those Ancestry.com subscription. I would say prescription. I need a prescription. Subscriptions. And I was able to get on, send in a vial of my spit. They were, ran the DNA, and then they sent me a report of where my family had all come from. Have any of you done that? Who cares about their family? Yeah, okay, Zach and I do. Okay, we care about where we come from, man. But in all reality, I was not able to tell where I came from. The report was accurate. My family most recently came from different parts of Mexico. I actually came across what was the card called? I do not remember. But basically an admittance card for when my grandfather came to the U.S., crossed over into Texas with my dad, who was a very young little boy. And so just in case you were wondering, my family's here legally, okay? But we did cross over, they did cross over, and I was able to, I could view that card, and I saw my grandpa's name on there, and my dad's name on there, and it was really, really interesting. And then they give you all kinds of other, like, you are, you're 50%, this and whatever else, and mine, there was a large percent. The largest percentage was from Mexico. But there were other smaller percentages. Your family also came from here or there. There's this portion. It was like a 0.5%. What was it, like Eastern European Jew? There was like the one I was most excited about. There was like a 0.5% of I cannot remember where it was from over in Europe, but basically it meant that I had some gypsy in me. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And, you have all these different little percentages or whatever. I was born in San Bernardino. That's basically what it means. But here they all knew their ancestry. Verse 19, as the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. So before they take off on this journey to the land of Canaan, they're going to be numbered for the first time. Now, we are not going to read through all of this. I'm going to read the first one, but then the pattern repeats, so we do not need to read through the rest of them. Verse 20. Now, the children of Reuben, Israel's oldest son, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, every male individually from 20 years old and above. So see, these are, he goes on to say, all who were able to go to war. That, they'll repeat that for each family, so we do not need to read through all of that. Verse 21, look at these numbers. Of the tribe of Reuben, 46,500. 46,000 males, 20 years old and above, just from the tribe of Reuben. 46,000. Did you realize there were that many? VeggieTales didn't make it look like that. You know, you watch VeggieTales, it's like, oh, there's like 30 people there. You know, you get this idea that, well, there's maybe like 100 people there, or maybe maybe there's a couple thousand. We're talking just the 20-year-old males, 20 years old and above, just from the tribe of Reuben, 46,500 men. That's a lot of dudes. Okay? He goes on in verse 23 to tell us of the tribe of Simeon, 59,300. Okay? You guys are keeping count, right? Because I'm going to ask you how much this is at the end. Verse 25, of the tribe of Gad, there were 45,650. Verse 27, of the tribe of Judah, there were 74,600. That's a lot of guys. Verse 29, those who were numbered of the tribe of Issachar were 54,400. Verse 31, of the tribe of Zebulun were 57,400. Verse 33, those who were numbered of the tribe of Ephraim were 40,500. Verse 35, of the tribe of Manasseh were 32,200. That's chump change, right? Some of these other tribes, man, 40,000, 50,000, 32,000. Child's play. Verse 37, of the tribe of Benjamin were 35,400. And our favorite, verse 39, of the tribe of Dan, 62,000. Everybody made fun of the tribe of Dan, right? Dan, what kind of name is that? But the guy's coming in hot with 62,700 guys. That's a lot of guys, okay? Verse 41, of the tribe of Asher, it's always itchy, were 41,500. And then finally, verse 43, of the tribe of Naphtali were 53,400. Those of you that are good at math, how many people is that? Hold on, let me figure that out. I'm going to say it's 603,550. Oh! Verse 46. All who were numbered were 603,550. Incredible. That's just males 20 years old and older. 603,000 ladies. Ladies, imagine. Get your pick. It's like there's over 600,000 guys here, you know. I don't know, this kind of sounds like a lot of trouble to me. I've got one son, just one son. 600 of those, it's like, you know, I can barely handle one. But let's do this. 603,550. 603,550. Let's drop the 550 and just keep the 603,000 in your mind, okay? Who's good at math? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. 603,000 20-year-old guys, okay? Let's say each of those guys, each one of the 603,000, let's say each one of them had just one sibling. How many people would that be?
$1,206,000.
Bam! It shot up just like that. 1,206,000. Okay? Now, let's say, what if each of these guys, 20 years old and above, had a sibling, one sibling, and one parent? Just one sibling and one parent. How many would that be?
People?
Yes.
1,809,000.
What is it?
1,809,000.
Man, you seriously just... Do you have a calculator watch? No. Just kidding. 1 million, 1.8 million? Yeah, 1.8 million. Now, imagine the Jews, it wasn't just 3 people to a family, right? These guys, you see these families, they're basically Mexican, okay? I've got a huge family. When we get together with all my family, man, there's so many people. It's just like, I'm there now, and I'm like the older uncle, like the old uncle who shows up and he's like, who are all these people? I do that now. I'm showing up when all of my family gets together, and it's like, whose kids are these? Wait, they're who? What? And I'm like, getting one of my cousins like, wait, whose kids are those? Oh, those are so-and-so's kids. When did she have kids? I thought she was like 11. What? No, she's 23 or whatever. What? And it's just this huge family. The Jews had these big families, so you can imagine. Estimates, just conservative estimates, are that there were 2.5 million people out there. Again, VeggieTales didn't tell us that. 2.5 million people? Maybe there were even more. I don't know. Maybe there was less. But you kind of get a sense of the numbers of the mass of people out there. Can you imagine? And then when we get into chapter 2 in just a few moments, we're going to hear that they set up camp. The way God is giving them directions on how to set up camp. 2.5 million people. Imagine you were to go to summer camp, which, by the way, online registration is now open for high school summer camp. Shameless plug, okay? I got no shame. But imagine you show up. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to camp, and you sign up, and then you show up, and there's like 2.5 million people out there. Like, dude, 2.5 million, high schoolers. Like, what? That's a lot of drama. But you show up, man, and then it is estimated that their camp, the size of their camp, was 12 square miles. 12 square miles. Incredible. The number of people out there is absolutely breathtaking. And God is leading them all through the wilderness. Imagine that. Now, let's do this in verse 47. I told you that we were going to, you know what, I went a little too far. No, I did. Let me see. Where are we at? Caretakers, that's where we're at. Verse 47, this is our third main division in chapter 1. And we'll slow down a little bit here before we quickly go through chapter 2. Verse 47 says, but the Levites, the tribe of Levi. Levi's not in here. We had one of our Levi's in the first service. Our other Levi is not here today. But the Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. So that number didn't include the Levites. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel. No need to number them. They're not going to the military. The Levites were excluded from military service. Okay? Why? Well, we find out why. It is because they are part of the maintenance crew. No military, just maintenance. It might be that it would be better to go to the military than clean toilets, right? Well, they weren't maintaining everything, the entire camp. They had a specific job. Verse 50. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle. Now, wait a minute. Who is supposed to be in charge of the tabernacle? Does anybody remember who that was? Anybody? Starts with an A, ends with an Aaron. Yes, that's it. Aaron, okay? So he's in charge, and all of his sons. Remember that? So what are these guys doing? They moving in on Aaron's territory? Well, he says here, but you shall appoint the Levites in verse 50 over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. You know, the tabernacle was made out of curtains, lots and lots of curtains. There was a curtain fence around the perimeter, and then the structure itself was made out of curtains. What happens if the curtains tear? Did you ever think about that? We don't really think about that because we think, well, it's God's tabernacle and God's stuff doesn't tear. Well, not true. What if the curtains tear? What if some of the furnishings in there, the table of showbread or the candelabra or the different things they had, what if those things tarnish? Who's responsible for maintaining those things, caring for them, polishing those things, getting them, keeping them looking good? Well, we find out that it's the Levites. Now, this is interesting to me because as we continue reading through the Bible, every so often you hear about the Levites in the temple and the Levites in the temple. And it's like, well, how did the Levites get? I thought it was Aaron, and where did the Levites come from? This is it. God chose them to maintain the tabernacle, and we'll find out in verse 51, not only maintaining it, but moving it in verse 51. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. And then look at this. Everything's going good, right? The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. Where did that come from? The Levites are, everybody's got their place and we've got all the numbers. And Levites, you're going to take care of the tabernacle. And if any strangers come, kill them. What? Where did that come from? Well, God wanted everybody to understand that he had chosen Aaron and his sons to serve inside of the temple or the tabernacle. And he had chosen the Levites as special people to maintain that tabernacle. It was no one else's business. There are things that we can help with, but then there are things that we cannot help with. And we need to be satisfied with the things that we can help with, and we need to not touch the things that we cannot help with. Okay? And he's making that clear here. Now let me ask you a question. Did you see why God chose the Levites for this task? Did anybody see that? Anybody see that in there? You didn't see it because it's not there. We have no idea why God chose the Levites. No idea. Why does God choose who he chooses? Why did God choose Chris Amaro to come to revival, to teach the high school? Why did he do that? Do you know? I don't know. I have no idea. If I don't have any idea, I'm sure you don't have any idea. Why did God choose Chris Plaza to oversee the junior high? No idea. Did we have some special qualifications? Some criteria that we met that God said, okay, you've met the criteria, now I can elevate you to glory. Oh, is that what he did? No. I have no idea why God chooses the people that he does. Sometimes in the Bible we get some indications, but there's times like this where he chose the Levi. Why did he choose the tribe of Levi? I do not know. We're not told. But it's just a reminder, a real simple, basic reminder that God chooses who he chooses. He's the one that decides. It's not up to us. God tells us what to do. Our only responsibility is to do it. It really is rather simple when you think about it that way. That God we just wait for God to tell us what to do, and then we just do it. Pretty easy. But he chooses them for the maintenance and for the moving. But what he does in verses 52 through 54 is he tells them how to make camp. Make camp. What does that mean? That's a term that we use when we're setting up camp, or tearing it down, but setting it up is really more accurate. So when we go to summer camp at the end of June. Did I mention that online registration is open? I did? No? Not sure? Online registration is open, okay, in case you didn't know that. But when we go to camp, we will set up camp. Set up tents. You'll get your sleeping bag thrown in there next to your best friend, your homegirl or your, best guy or whatever. And you're like, guys and guys, okay? And girls. But you'll set up, you'll make camp, okay? He gives them specific instructions on how to make camp. Order. Everything is order. Order the people, count them all. Now the Levites, I've got a specific order for them, and I'm going to show them how to set up camp. Verse 52, the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, everyone by his own camp, everyone by his own standard. That means their banner. We'll talk about that some more in a moment. According to their armies, the children of Israel. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, the tabernacle of meeting, that there be no wrath on the congregation of the children of Israel, and the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus the children of Israel did, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, they did. You see, he sets up, we'll get a diagram, a picture in a little bit, but he's got the tabernacle. Around the tabernacle, you've got the Levites, the tribe of Levi. And he says he did that so that the children of Israel, the rest of them, would not experience God's wrath. How would they experience God's wrath? By getting too close to the tabernacle. That's not where God wanted everybody. There was a specific place for everybody, everything, the tents, the people, everything. Order. Okay? Now, Numbers chapter 2. Go back there. Numbers chapter 2. Now, verse 1 says, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of his father's house. So a standard would have been a banner, a sign of some sort. And each family is going to have one. We'll find out in just a moment that Judah is going to have one, and they'll have their own section. So that as you come into the camp, you realize, hey, I'm looking for the tribe of Gad. Oh, there it is. They're over there, and you go over there to go see the tribe of Gad, or I'm here to, I'm looking for the tribe of Issachar, and you would look and I can see their banner over there. That's the tribe of Issachar. You go over there. So each tribe would have their banner with its logo or insignia on it. So verse 3, on the east side. East is directly behind you, directly in front of me. That's east. Okay? And again, we will not read all of these, but let me read the first one so that you get an idea of how this is set up. On the east side, toward the rising of the sun. See, there's order. God picks a specific direction. He says the east is where the sun rises. Those of the standard of the forces, he's organizing them by their armies and by their families, with Judah shall camp according to their armies. And Nahshon, the son of Amminadab, shall be the leader of the children of Judah. So, gives them a specific direction and place, gives them a specific leader. And his army in verse 4 was numbered at 74,600. Those who camp next to him in verse 5 shall be the tribe of Issachar. And Nathaniel, the son of Zuar, shall be the leader of the tribe of Issachar. And he gives us a number. Verse 7, then comes the tribe of Zebulun. And then in verse, what's going on? What's happening? Excuse me for just a moment. Talk quietly amongst yourselves. There we go. In verse 14, then comes the tribe of Gad. And the leader of the children of Gad, he tells us there. I'm sorry, I jumped a little bit. I'm sorry. Gosh, I jumped real far. I'm sorry. Verse 3, we have the tribe of Judah. Verse 5, next to him, Issachar. Verse 7, then comes the tribe of Zebulun. Okay, so we've got Reuben, we've got Judah. That's Reuben, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. See how that's set up? Then he goes on to say, on the south side. So if I'm facing east, south is to my right, your left. On the south side shall be the standard of the forces with Reuben, the tribe of Reuben. You can see Reuben there. Reuben on this, that would be south. Reuben, Simeon, Gad, we're told there, beginning in verse 10. Verse 12 mentions Simeon. Verse 14 mentions Gad. Okay? Now notice in verse 17, and the tabernacle of meeting shall move out with the camp of the Levites in the middle of the camps. Okay? Tribe of Levi, right in the center there, around the tabernacle. Verse 18, on the west side. West side is the best side, right? Only if you are in a gang from the west side. Other than that, it's not the best side. Verse 18, on the west side shall be the standard of the forces with Ephraim. There's Ephraim up here. Notice to the west, okay, Ephraim. On the west side shall be the standard of the forces with Ephraim. Next to him in verse 20 is Manasseh. And then next to him in verse 22 is Ben. And then in verse 25, finally we have the north side. So we've got, we saw the east, we saw the south, we saw the west. Now the north side in verse 25, the standard of the forces with Dan. There's Dan, him and his large numbers on the north side. And in verse 27, the man with ashy elbows, Asher. Okay, and then in verse 29, then comes the tribe of Naphtali at the back there in verse 29. Verse 32, these are the ones who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses. Excuse me, first day with my new lips. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces were 603,550. But the Levites in verse 33 were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards, and so they broke camp, each one by his family, according to their fathers' houses. Order, order, order. Order is the buzzword for today. Order. God is a God of order. Now, there are, when you get online, you can look up camping according to Numbers chapter 2 or whatever. You'll see all sorts of different diagrams. This is my favorite, so this is the one I brought. I do not know, believe it or not, I was not there. But as I read, this is what makes the most sense to me. To you too? Yes? Kind of makes sense? Okay. This one makes the most sense, so this is why I shared this one. We got the tabernacle in the middle with the cloud. Okay, that's the basically symbolizing God. God is in the cloud. Okay, got the tribe of the Levi around there, and you got all the different tribes. What do you notice about that setup, sir?
It's a cross.
It's a cross. It is a cross. It's in this the form of a cross. Now again, whether it was specifically set up like this or not, I do not know. But I love this. If in fact this is how God organizes it, I love this. The cross was not a common symbol to these people. The cross was not used or even invented. The cross, as we know it, as a torture device, a device for death, was not invented. It wouldn't be invented for long after this. And if the people were in the form of a cross, did they really even know that? That's a good question. I do not know. They would not really have been familiar with a cross. But I like this because what it does is it reminds me that God all along, all throughout history, has been pointing to Jesus. Before Jesus came, everything was pointing to Jesus in the future. Jesus came. Here we are we're after Jesus, right? Jesus was born about 2,000 years ago, but we're always pointing back to Jesus. Everything points toward Jesus. And it's a great reminder that God always had Jesus in mind. That was always the thought. It was always a process of getting his people to believe in Jesus, to receive their Messiah. Okay? So that's a great picture. I really like that. Is there anything else you notice about that setup? Yes, exactly. The tabernacle and the pillar of smoke that symbolizes God is at the center. God is always at the center of their lives. And what a wonderful lesson for you and I, that God ought to be at the center of all that we do. If I play football, or basketball, or lacrosse, or whatever sport I play, God ought to be at the center of that. I ought not leave him over on the sideline. Well, God, just stay here, I'll be back. But he ought to be at the center of all that I do. Now, it might be that he's at the center of what I do and not necessarily at the center of my team, because you might play with a bunch of heathens, right? They don't love God. But he can always be at the center of all that I do. Maybe I'm not into sports. Maybe I'm into drama. He ought to be at the center of that. Maybe I don't do sports and I don't do drama, but maybe I'm on the debate team. Whatever it is that I'm involved in, God ought to be at the center of it. When I go out to train for my particular sport, I ought to outwork everybody on that field or on that court, not because I'm just trying to get me the top spot, but because I'm doing it for God. He's at the center of all that I do. I ought to be doing that. If I play football, I had better be the hardest hitter out there on that field, because I'm doing it with God at the center. I'm doing it with the purpose of pleasing God, giving my best. And that's what football requires, hitting. So I better do my best. Whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to keep God at the center of it. When I am making big decisions, I want to keep God at the center of that. Not what do I feel like doing, how much money would I like to make. Those things are secondary. What's first is, what does God consider? What does God think about this? If I make this decision, how is that going to affect my relationship with God? If I make this decision, how is that going to affect my relationship with God? I want to keep God at the center of all I do, my entire life. What a wonderful, basic, easy lesson to remember. God is at the center. God better be at the center of all that we do together in here on Sundays and Wednesdays and at camps, like summer camp. Did I mention summer camp yet? But he better be at the center of all we do. If God is not at the center of what we're doing, then this is not really youth group. Then this is just a social club. Right? If he's not at the center of it, then it's just a social club. Then it's just to come hang out time. That's all it is. So we want to make sure we're keeping God at the center of all that we do. But here's where I want to finish. If you're taking notes, you don't need to turn there, but if you're taking notes and you want to write this down and look at it, Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2 tells us there, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus. Does anybody know how the rest of the verse goes? Okay, good. We are created in Christ Jesus for good works, which he prepared beforehand. We were created for good works, which he prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them, in those good works. We should be performing those good works. What does he mean by beforehand, which God prepared beforehand? What does that mean? Chris?
Before we were born.
Yes. Yeah, before we were born. Beforehand. Now, what does this have to do with Numbers 1 and 2? And what does that have to do with me? Here's what it has to do with you. We are, as God's people, you being young God's people, me, not so much, but young God's people. We ought never, ever, ever, there's no reason why we should ever think that our lives have no meaning or that there's no purpose for my life. I ought never question why I wake up in the morning. The meaning of my life and the purpose of my life and the point of me waking up every morning is to perform those good works which God prepared beforehand. What? I don't get it. What are you getting at? Order. Your life is not accidental. It is not just random chaos. There is a purpose for your existence. There is a purpose for your existence that God determined and set up beforehand. So that I ought never wonder, do I even have any purpose here? Or is my life just meaningless? Now, it may be that as a young person, you do not know exactly what it is that God wants you to do yet. There are some basics, but maybe you don't know specifically. And you go, you know what, Pastor Chris, he's been called to be a youth pastor. And the other Pastor Chris has been called to be a youth pastor. And, maybe I know these people and, they've been called to do this and called to do that, but what am I called to? And I understand. Maybe you do not know your specific calling from God yet. But you do know that your life has purpose and meaning according to Ephesians chapter 2, and that when God is ready, and you're ready, you don't know if you're ready or not, when God is ready, then he'll reveal what your specific purpose is in this life. But until then, you have some general things that you can do, like going to church. Oh, you're already here. Studying his word, what you're doing this morning, praying, telling other people about Jesus, fellowshipping like you're doing. Those are things that you can be doing. We know we're supposed to do those things. We can do those things while we're waiting for God to reveal a specific purpose to us. Our calling, we call it. But we ought not never wake up and think, you know what, my life doesn't have any meaning. Some people will take that thought, you know what, my life doesn't really have any purpose, no grand meaning, and you know what, I feel like there's no reason for me to even be here. And they will either self-destruct or they will take their own life because there's no reason for this life. Why am I even here? On Friday morning, 7:30 in the morning, a man jumped off of the bridge, the interchange, the 215 freeway going in and out of Riverside. Jumped off to his death. Lady called and told the police, somebody just landed in the lane in front of me. Took his own life. Now, I do not know anything about that man. Nothing. But my guess is that I was going to say he woke up that morning. Not just that morning, but he probably was struggling with purpose in his life. And it may be that he lost someone or something that finally got him to that point where he thought, life is not worth living anymore. I do not have a purpose. There's no grand scheme for my life. It's just random chance. And he decided to jump off a bridge and end it. You and I do not ever have to go there. You may wake up tomorrow thinking, what am I even doing in this life? What am I even doing in this world? And that's an okay question. What am I even doing here? But more importantly is, what is God doing here? And if he hasn't revealed specifics to you yet, hey, relax. You continue seeking him, doing what you're doing, reading his word and praying and coming to church and fellowship. You just continue doing those things, and when God decides it's time, he'll reveal his calling for your life. There's a purpose. God already decided that beforehand. There's order in what he does. He doesn't do anything randomly, by chance. Just throw it out there, without purpose. It's always with a purpose. Father, thank you so much.